The abyss. That's what we're descending into. A moral abyss, a political abyss, and of course, above all else, a humanitarian abyss. Now, in the current crisis, I did not have high expectations, to be clear, about the Labour opposition. I would, of course, have expected them to strongly condemn the sickening atrocities committed by Hamas against innocent civilians, as they correctly did. Now, in terms of Israel's response, call me unreasonable, call me a deranged extremist, but do you think I might not have been able to hope that at the very least, Labour would oppose committing war crimes? They would oppose Israel committing war crimes. Now, the episode I'm about to talk about is profoundly disturbing. It's disturbing because it demonstrates that the people in charge of the Labour Party have no real interest in human rights, let alone international law. Now, that has profound implications for their assumption of power, which is almost inevitable by the end of next year. Let's just start by listening to Keir Starmer on LBC.
I'm very clear. Israel does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself and Hamas bears responsibility for these terrorist acts. And I would call on all responsible states, particularly Middle East responsible states, to call this out for what it is, and to stand with the world in utterly condemning these actions by Hamas.
Keir Starmer is a former human rights lawyer. He was asked if Israel had the right to impose a siege in which power and water was withheld from the citizens of Gaza. He answered that Israel had a right to defend itself. He then says everything should be done within international law. What on earth are you talking about? You're not a serious man, are you? At best, despite your pretensions. Listen to yourself. You do not need to be a human rights lawyer to know that collective punishment and the cutting off of water and electricity to a civilian population is against international law. It is a war crime. Let me read out the relevant part of Article 33 of the Geneva Convention. Individual responsibility, collective penalties, pillage and reprisals. That's the title. No protected person may be punished for an offence he or she has not personally committed. Collective penalties and likewise all measures of intimidation or of terrorism are prohibited. Collective penalties, that's what it's referring to. What Starmer just said is an open and flagrant convention of the Geneva Convention. Now, two things here. If he doesn't know that's a violation of international law, then given his profession, he is grossly incompetent. So why should he be trusted with the premiership? If he can't get basic facts right, relevant to his vocation, if he can't get those right, how are we able to simply trust him with running the country? But I'm not going to go all crudely legalistic here, because where is the humanity of someone who speaks like that, who just goes and says in a blasé way that a state has a right to deprive an entire people of water and electricity, knowing as he must do, unless he really is completely thick, that half the population of Gaza are children and that 80% depend on international humanitarian assistance in order to survive. This will mean, as he must know, again, unless he's completely stupid, babies dying when their incubators are turned off, desperately injured patients in hospitals dying, and vast numbers of other civilians dying, often torturous deaths for a whole range of reasons. Now it gets worse. It gets worse. Let's just listen to Emily Thornberry, Labour's shadow Attorney General, and she's also therefore, she's charged with the legal position, the official legal position of the Labour Party.
But I mean, I don't know.
They've already cut off the food.
I hear what you're saying, but what I'm saying
is that against international law? It's really simple. Sir Keir Starmer doesn't seem to think it is.
What is simple is that whatever actions are taken by a democracy, it has to be done in accordance with international law. And we have heard tonight from the President of the United States that he has been on the phone to Netanyahu, and both of them have agreed that democracies need to act in accordance with international law.
Pause there, if I may. Do you think cutting off food, water and electricity is within international law?
I think that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself against terrorism.
That's not the question I asked.
It is an answer to the question that you've asked, and I think it's an appropriate one at this time.
Why won't you answer whether you think it's in line with international law or not?
Because I've tried to answer, and I've tried to say that we've already heard from your previous guest about what might be happening on a day-to-day basis. So we're now on day 4. And so we hear that there are troops massing on the border. There may well be an incursion. Immediately before an incursion, then, as the permanent representative have said, that it might be appropriate in those circumstances for there to be the sort of action that we've heard about. And then the invasion afterwards. I don't know, because at the moment we're in the middle of a hot war, and Israel is in the middle of defending itself, and we have to stand with Israel, just like we would expect people to stand with us if we were the victims of terrorism as well.
Just a little personal comment here. I've always got on well with Emily. She's my local MP. I've socialised with her. I've talked to her many times one-on-one over the years. I recently marched alongside her at London Pride. And I'm just going to say this to you straight, Emily. I am beyond disgusted with you. You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself. The state of what you just said. You don't even believe what you're saying. And that makes it even worse. That's not an excuse. You just want a big plump job in a Starmer administration, and if that means throwing the lives of toddlers you will never meet under a bus, then so be it. How far you've sunk. Glibly responding on national television by refusing to condemn the cutting off of food and electricity to Gaza as a violation of international law, and glibly just saying, well, Israel has an absolute right to defend itself, refusing to condemn a straightforward war crime, which is what we're talking about, cutting off food and electricity to a civilian population, a straightforward war crime, which you are unable to describe as such. Now, I hope that what you did there, with consideration clearly only for your future career prospects, haunts you for the rest of your life. And not a day doesn't go past where you don't remember what you said and feel some form of all-consuming shame. And I know this is harsh things to be said about people, in this case, someone I've known and admired and respected. But this is beneath contempt. It is so grotesque. And the thing is, it's not simply a case of being upset or outraged. This matters. I'll tell you why it matters. Because what this does is help build a consensus in the West which allows Israel to behave exactly as it wishes, and that means the mass slaughter of innocent civilians. These statements from these Labour leaders aren't simply tasteless or outrageous. They are a matter of life and death. And therefore, issues of etiquette, of being, let's not be impolite, and let's turn down the temperature, when you have Labour politicians essentially defending war crimes on national television. Now, the Labour Muslim Network issued a statement, and they said Sir Keir Starmer's comments on LBC today endorsed plans for the collective punishment of 2.2 million people in the Gaza Strip. Collective punishment is a war crime. Cutting off power and water to hospitals and life-saving facilities is a war crime. No government, no army, and no country can ever be above international law. We ask you directly, Sir Keir, retract your comments, apologise to Palestinians, and meet urgently with Palestinian organisations in the UK, Labour Muslim Network, and the Muslim Council of Britain. Now, that organisation, the Labour Muslim Network, represents Muslims of the Labour Party, and they are ignored, marginalised, and treated with contempt by the Labour leadership, who frankly just see Muslims as voting fodder. That's the truth. That, again, is illustrative of how Muslim voices are treated in this country. Keir Starmer, not going to give a toss about that, is he? Doesn't care. Now, it also led to the resignation of Young Labour's black and Asian minority ethnic officer, Libaba Khalid. Let's just read what she said. Statement of resignation. It's with a heavy heart that today I've handed in my resignation from my role as Young Labour BAME officer. As a Palestinian with direct family in Gaza, I'm absolutely appalled by the comments made to LBC by the leader of the Labour Party and my local MP, Keir Starmer, who said that Israel has the right to withhold water and electricity. Collective punishment is a war crime under international law. This position was then reaffirmed by Emily Thornberry. I've spent the last few days worried about the safety of my family, and with electricity now cut off and communication limited, these worries are only exacerbated. I received zero support from the Labour Party, a common theme experienced by other Muslim and Palestinian members. The comments from the leadership this week have been the last straw. I can only conclude that the Labour Party is no longer a safe space for Palestinians and Muslims. Now, this evening, the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy said, Labour fully supports Israel's right to defend itself, rescue hostages and protect civilians in line with international law. We must distinguish Hamas terrorists from the Palestinian people. There must be humanitarian access to Gaza for food, water, medicines and electricity. Now, this is too little too late, and it does nothing to reverse the damage caused by Keir Starmer and Emily Thornberry. At best, it shows Labour is all over the shop, doesn't know what it's doing, which doesn't exactly bode well for how they deal with the crisis when they're in power. What Starmer and Thornberry need to do is apologise, and I mean grovel for what they have said. Now, indeed, Labour Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey has backed Britain deploying patrol and surveillance aircraft and 2 Royal Navy ships on the Eastern Mediterranean support of Israel. A tokenistic gesture, but one that makes clear Britain stands fully behind a military onslaught which has killed hundreds of kids, as well as many others, medics, journalists, UN officials, you name it. Now, remember all the opposition among Labour MPs about how Corbyn's foreign policy positions made him beyond the pale, grotesque as it was for many who were de facto apologists for example, the Saudi regime or the Turkish regime. But the state of these people, the state, a core tenet of self-described liberals is the rule of law, the rules-based order. Now, look, this Tory government is a absolute moral and political disgrace, and you can sift through my videos to see exactly what I think of them, as well as years of books, columns, TV appearances, you name it. They were always going to have a morally bankrupt position on Gaza, but it would be grotesque hypocrisy if I didn't challenge this outrageous positioning of the opposition, which itself allows the British government to uncritically champion Israel's behaviour and thus helps allow Israel to behave as it so wishes. Now, we also know from New Labour's term in office, from its invasion of Iraq in alliance with Bush, for example, or its support for the Saudi regime, we could go on, that the sort of people now running the Labour Party have no real interest in human rights or even in international law. That's the tradition they stand in. But again, it just underlines what a deceptive fraud Keir Starmer is. One of the pledges of his leadership campaign, and I know it seems like satire to talk about his pledges, Pledge 4, put human rights at the heart of foreign policy, review all UK arms sales and make us a force for international peace and justice. Now, these people are bankrupt, and if you don't see it, then I'm afraid that moral bankruptcy is contagious. It is beyond belief. And as I've said, what this has done is allow a consensus which allows Israel to commit some of the most appalling acts which will result in mass civilian death. And it has to be called out for what it is. Please like, subscribe, do support us on patreon.com/Jose84 to keep the show on the road. And I'll speak to you soon.